This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Today, we talk about a fascinating species of political animal, the Republican Party. Professor Geoffrey Kabaservice has written a history of the GOP since Eisenhower and says its moderate wing is pretty much extinct. Democratic political analyst Erica Seifert has conducted focus groups of Republicans and predicts that their takeover by extremists marginalizes the party's national appeal. And Bill Press, along with Chris Moody of Yahoo News, interviews Jess McIntosh, communications director of Emily's List, about Project Madam President. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Historian Geoffrey Kabaservice has studied Republican moderates of the past, and they include people named Cheney and Rumsfeld, and traces the party's history to its present state. And, he says, the moderate wing of the Republican Party is dead and gone. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Geoffrey Kabaservice is the author of a book called Rule and Ruin, The Downfall of Moderation and the Destruction of the Republican Party from Eisenhower to the Tea Party. He has written for numerous national publications and has been an assistant professor of history at Yale University. Geoffrey Kabaservice, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And always nice to talk with you. You've written a fascinating history of the Republican Party over the past 60 years and the death of moderation. Is the Republican Party of Nixon, Goldwater, Reagan, and the Bushes dead?
Well, I do think the Republican Party, as it had existed through most of American history, came to an end somewhere around 1980. In other words, the Republican Party had been a coalition of interests, much as every other political party in the United States history. But since 1980, and increasingly, it has become a party of ideology, a party that defines itself by conservatism. So the past role that was played by moderates and even liberal Republicans in the party simply doesn't exist anymore.
Do you think the Tea Party governors and members of Congress obstruct government just because they hate government and don't want to make things better? I mean, what happened to compassionate conservatism?
Well, we tend to speak of conservatism as being one unitary thing. But of course, there are different branches, different flavors of conservatism. And the modern conservative movement has always had difficulty reconciling its libertarian wing with its more traditionalist or religious wing. And so, the obvious contradiction comes up on issues like gay rights, where the libertarians perhaps might be content to let people simply do their thing. But the religious right often wants to use government to enforce its view of morality, and in that sense, police the bedroom. So there's just a real contradiction between those two approaches to even conservative government. I think people come to Washington from a variety of motives. Some people nowadays do want to take what they see as principled stands and bring government to a halt, on the view that if government is simply just going to keep going and keep spending, then the wisest thing to do is simply try to put a stop to it. But I think, increasingly there is a belief that the shutdown that we saw in October 2013 was something that was counterproductive and even damaging to the Republican Party. And what's yet to be determined is whether you're going to see a kind of revival of positive conservatism, people who want to hold office because there are particular things that they want to achieve in Congress or even in the presidency that they can't achieve simply as an obstructionist minority.
Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the longer term. But of course, what is long term nowadays? A few months, or how soon do people forget? But this last shutdown, I get the feeling anyway, it hurt a lot of people in ways that they might not have otherwise expected it to. And then all of a sudden, hey, wait a minute, you know what? This was not a good idea. And I think we have seen that recently in some elections in the country.
Yeah, I would actually argue that the elections which took place in early November 2013, of course, did reveal a turn against the sort of Tea Party extremism, which had been fairly popular up to that point.
Yeah.
And you can actually point not just to Chris Christie's victory in the New Jersey governorship, not just to Ken Cuccinelli's loss in the Virginia governor's race, but also to smaller races around the country, like the Alabama Republican primary race,
Yep.
in which you actually saw the Chamber of Commerce donating a fair amount of money to what you might call the establishment Republican nominee and fending off the Tea Party challenger. And, what I'm very curious to see is whether, you're going to see some kind of turn of the business part of the Republican Party against the ideological wing. Because I think a lot of people in business were actually very alarmed by what seemed to be the cavalier attitude taken by the Tea Partiers toward the prospect of the United States credit default. An economic meltdown that would have followed from the U.S. defaulting on its debts would have been absolutely catastrophic, and there would be no reason for it other than the fact that, this was something that was ideologically desirable for a small faction in the Congress. So, again, what I think we will have to look for moving forward is whether you will see the establishment, or at least more business-oriented wing of the Republican Party, the wing that actually wants to govern, taking action against the Tea Party ideological wing, which to this point has had much more advantage.
You conclude that, quote, "We dismiss moderation at our peril and we will fail or flourish together," close quote. But one can make an argument that in a two-party system, there ought to be distinct differences. Are you suggesting that only moderates should or can govern?
No. I think, again, in my rhetoric about failing or flourishing together, the sense that I had was that good ideas can come from anywhere on the political spectrum. You can't say, I think, even if you were a firmly committed Republican or Democrat, that it's only liberal or conservative views that have made America great. Often it's been views and programs and policies that have emerged from a dialogue between the two parties. But my point is that you can't actually have a dialogue between the two parties unless you have at least a critical mass of moderates in both parties. If you get into a situation where one party absolutely refuses to compromise or negotiate with the other, then you're going to get stalemate at best, but more likely you're going to get horrible festering problems that at some point will escape the ability of anyone to control them. And that's what worries me for the future.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Geoffrey Kabaservice, author of the book called Rule and Ruin, The Downfall of Moderation and the Destruction of the Republican Party from Eisenhower to the Tea Party. Jeff, who are some of the great Republican moderates in modern history? And are there any moderate leaders on the GOP horizon? Perhaps Chris Christie?
In some sense, the tradition of Republican moderation goes back to Abraham Lincoln. And certainly the people in the period that I cover from the 1960s onward would look to Lincoln for their inspiration, and also to Dwight Eisenhower, who does seem, particularly in retrospect, to have been a very effective president. Of course, in recent times, you do have some people in Congress who still, in some sense, answer to the label of moderate. You have Peter King from New York, Devin Nunes from California. You have Susan Collins of Maine in the Senate. Essentially anywhere that there is a mass of Democrats, anywhere that you have a blue state and you want to have a Republican elected to office, it's going to be a different kind of Republican than you would see getting elected to a state in the South or elsewhere. But I think the thing that is missing nowadays is any sense of a moderate Republican movement that you did actually have going from the 1960s through about 1970. What you've seen since then is the growth of the conservative infrastructure of think tanks and funding organizations and grassroots groups and all the rest of it, and no real counterpart on the moderate side. So although there are people, who have served in the House recently who I can point to who I admire very much, Amo Houghton is one of my favorite congressmen of all time, Jim Leach, Bob Michael, to go a bit further back, you don't really see any kind of concerted moderate Republican force operating in the Congress or elsewhere in the government.
Is there a feeling that perhaps they can't? I again will look at a guy like John Boehner, who I would think is, well, there are plenty of things I disagree with him on. He's probably more moderate than a lot of the folks that he's trying to manage within his own party. But
well, we tend to forget that John Boehner actually came into Congress as a bomb thrower. He, in fact, was one of the Gingrich Brigade back in 1994, who led to the last government shutdown. He was all in favor of that government shutdown, as a matter of fact. But, again, Boehner, by remaining in office, has become much more pragmatic. And the difference that you have now in the Republican Party is no longer between conservatives and moderates. It's between pragmatic conservatives and highly ideological conservatives. And Boehner falls into the pragmatic camp. But, again, this issue of Chris Christie, let's say, here's someone who is in many ways a throwback to the moderates. In other words, he believes in working with Democrats to get things done. He's positive and achievement-oriented. And yet his demeanor is completely different from the moderates of old. I mean, a lot of them tended to be sort of genteel, waspy types, and that's not how anyone would describe Chris Christie. In fact, he's extremely belligerent, and that in some ways makes his brand of moderation more appealing than it might be otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. For everything negative he meant to most Americans, Richard Nixon actually got more liberal programs enacted into law than probably anyone since. We're talking about affirmative action, creation of the EPA, ban on biological weapons, the opening to China, expansion of welfare. What's the real story there? Was he a closet liberal, or did he just not care about ideology? Or are we just in that different a time?
I don't think he did care about ideology, to be honest. I think his main interest was in foreign policy. And he saw his opening to China, his détente with the Soviet Union, and his welcoming of China, I guess, into the global community of nations again as his major accomplishments. And that meant to some extent that he was willing to work with moderate Republicans to give them a piece of the action, as he put it. And it was largely the moderate Republicans who did the program development and the kind of work that led to all the things you're talking about, such as the creation of the EPA, the creation of OSHA, the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, the ban on biological weapons, the extension of welfare. I mean, these were mostly what the moderate Republicans had been working for. But Nixon was somebody who, he was almost schizophrenic in a way. There was part of him that looked at the moderates and thought they were soft and contemptible. But then there was also part of him that actually admired their ability to come up with ideas and to put them into practice. And it was his ability to sort of play both sides of the fence that made him, up until Watergate, a pretty effective president.
Before we let you go, a truly fascinating anecdote that I think our listeners would like to hear. It's about the very left-wing New York Congressman Allard Lowenstein and a young Republican House member named Donald Rumsfeld. Can you tell us the story, please?
Yeah, it was sort of an unlikely friendship. The two of them met in the late 1950s when they were both congressional aides. And Rumsfeld in those days was a moderate. Lowenstein was pretty much always a very liberal Democrat. But the lines between the parties weren't as fiercely drawn as they are now, and Rumsfeld, was a fairly eclectic person. He had eclectic friendships, and he and Lowenstein did become friends. And that's because they were both very bright, very ambitious, and I think they'd both been wrestlers in college. Rumsfeld at Princeton and Lowenstein at North Carolina. So they would wrestle with each other in the house gym, and then they would wrestle together with ideas about political philosophy, even late into the night. And they stayed close after Rumsfeld served in the Nixon administration, while Lowenstein became one of the leaders of the youth movement, the anti-Vietnam movement. And in fact, Rumsfeld was with Lowenstein on his victory platform when Lowenstein was elected to Congress in 1968. And they even talked about buying a newspaper together. But then in 1970, Lowenstein was running for re-election in his predominantly Republican district in Long Island. And he was coming under attack from his Republican challengers, saying that he was unpatriotic, that he was inciting students to burn down the universities. And Rumsfeld came to the defense of his friend. But this was when Spiro Agnew, the vice president, was running amok and calling for polarization of both parties along ideological lines. And the White House forced Rumsfeld to recant and to endorse his opponent. And Lowenstein lost, and he never held office again. And I was going through Robert Novak's autobiography of a few years ago. Novak, who was a reporter at that point, knew both men well, and he knew that Lowenstein was probably more affected by Rumsfeld's betrayal than he was even by losing the election. And so he asked Rumsfeld if ditching Lowenstein bothered him. Sure, said Rumsfeld, but that's politics. And Novak said it was the first time that he fully appreciated Rumsfeld's genuine hardness. It was that hardness that allowed Rumsfeld to go on to retain higher office. I think he was Secretary of Defense under both Gerald Ford and George W. Bush. But you also have to wonder if his failures in the Iraq War stemmed in some sense from this need to be perceived as tough and the lack of human sentiment, as well as the role that politics and ideology played in the whole Iraq War and the occupation. And I actually am thinking of this phrase by E.F. Forster that we could modify. If I had to choose between betraying my party and betraying my friend, I hope I should have the guts to betray my party. But of course, that's not how most politicians do things.
No, certainly not, and certainly not in that case either that we talk about. Geoffrey Kabaservice is the author of a book called Rule and Ruin, that we've been talking about today, The Downfall of Moderation and the Destruction of the Republican Party from Eisenhower to the Tea Party. Geoffrey, as always, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you very much, Jim.
And we look forward to doing it again. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Democratic political analyst Erica Seifert has taken a close look at the three parts of the GOP: moderates, evangelicals, and Tea Partiers. She believes that in the long term, the Republican Party is marginalizing itself as a national party, and we'll speak with her about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
If you doubt that big money and lies can pervert elections, look at Initiative 522 in Washington State. It had been put on the ballot by a grassroots coalition of consumers, organic producers, environmentalists, and others who want honesty in food labeling. The initiative would have required grocery manufacturers that slip genetically manipulated organisms into their products to state that fact on their food labels. But the industry ran a dishonest multi-million-dollar PR campaign, including ads to scare voters by falsely claiming that the truth in labeling provision would jack up each family's annual food costs by an average of more than $450. Especially dishonest and likely illegal was the industry's crude attempt to keep voters from knowing who was funding the attack ads. A front group, the Grocery Manufacturers Association, set up a dummy campaign account called Defense of Brand, which really was a hide-the-brand artifice. It let big-name food giants put some $11 million into the no-labeling campaign without revealing their participation and angering consumers. But the state attorney general exposed this dodge and forced the giants to fess up. Behind this hoax within a hoax within another hoax were such names as Campbell Soup, Coke, Nestle, and Pepsi. With their money and deceptions, they prevailed in the vote, but that same combo of cash and lies also infuriated millions of consumers and others across the country who seek nothing more than a basic level of corporate integrity and a minimal level of control over the food they bring into their homes. This is Jim Hightower saying, the GMO profiteers can run, but finally they won't be able to hide from the growing number of Americans who are on to them and literally are fed up with their tactics. GMO labeling laws are currently being pushed in some 20 other states. The fun is just beginning.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. After a series of focus groups, Erica Seifert finds that while the Tea Party and the evangelicals of the party are indeed extremists, they are not the Republican fringe. They are the majority of the party, and that bodes ill for the GOP's future. And we are joined now by Erica Seifert, Senior Associate at Greenberg Quinlan Rosner, specializing in American politics. She primarily conducts research for Democracy Corps, a nonprofit organization founded by Stan Greenberg and James Carville. She is a co-author with them of a new study about the Republican Party. Erica Seifert, thanks for joining us again today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you and your colleagues have done a remarkable study of the Republican Party based on focus groups of evangelicals, Tea Party people, and moderates. How would you characterize each of them in general terms?
Yeah, so one of the ways we broke them out was we did it so that they're exclusive groups. So we took the moderates first and we pulled them out. So once you got into a group, you couldn't qualify for another. So even though there's overlap between evangelicals and Tea Partiers, we pulled the evangelicals first. So when we talk about Tea Party here, we're really talking about non-evangelical Tea Party participants, even though the evangelicals, many of them do characterize themselves as affiliated with the Tea Party. So when we do that, we find that evangelical is predominantly female, 58% female. They're mostly, over age 50. They're 92% white, the 78% married. So they look very different than when you're looking at the national electorate. And then the Tea Party is more predominantly male. It's only 44% female, 92% white again. And in both of these groups, they vote only or mostly for Republicans. They're voting like 90% only mostly for Republicans in the Tea Party group and 82% only for Republicans in the evangelical group. So they're really very conservative factions of the Republican Party. And
the moderates? I mean, where do they slide in there?
Yeah, they look very different. They're 65% under age 50, 84% white, 10% Hispanic. They're only 58% married. They attend church less regularly. Only 23% say they attend church regularly. And only half of them say they vote only or mostly for Republicans. So they're very different, and they live in different places too. In the Tea Party and evangelical groups, these folks live predominantly in congressional districts that are controlled by Republicans, and in predominantly states that are controlled by Republicans. Whereas the moderate folks are living in districts that are held by Democrats, and in states that have mixed representation.
And I'm guessing that tends to be more rural versus urban in terms of Tea Party evangelical to moderates?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now, these focus group members, to me, sound paranoid. I mean, they think that Democrats and President Obama are winning every political fight and control the country. I mean, really, don't they read the papers, or is it just Fox News for them?
Well, it actually is just Fox News for them, and they watch Fox News almost exclusively. So, for example, when we ask participants in the focus groups to do sort of a free word association, and we'll give them a bunch of things to respond to. And when we say Fox News, one of the women in the group said she was missing 2 hours of it. That was her response, was that she was at the focus group, so she was missing 2 hours of it right now. But it's not just, political. They have this real sense of losing, and they feel like they're losing demographically, and that's true. They are losing demographically. And evangelicals feel really threatened by what they call culture rot, and the center of that culture rot is gay marriage, and they're losing that battle as well, for sure. And even within their own party, they think that, liberals, and they call them rhinos, have taken over. So they do have this real sense of loss, and some of it is real, and some of it is married, but they do feel like they're losing in big ways and small ways.
We're speaking with Erica Seifert, Senior Associate at Greenberg Quinlan Rosner, who specializes in American politics. And speaking of Fox News, Erica, at one point you report that Republican moderates actually are a little tired of that network and some of the extreme voices in the Tea Party movement. But moderates really don't have much of a say in things, do they?
That's correct. They really don't. So there are just 25% of the party as moderate Republicans. They are a real minority in their own party, and also because they're living in different places, right? As we said, they're living in more urban or metro areas, and they're living in states and districts that many of which are controlled by Democrats. They just aren't represented in this other side of the Republican Party, and it's a real dividing line between the Tea Party and evangelical majority in the Republican Party. And these, again, are folks who almost exclusively watch news, and then there's the moderates who mock it and they call it ridiculous. and they're just not living in the same world or having the same conversations. And that's a pretty big point, I think, because we hear a lot of progressives and pundits referring to the extreme fringe of the Republican Party as though Tea Party folks are on the fringe, but that's just not true. I mean, these are a majority of the Republican Party. 53% qualify as Tea Party and are evangelical Republicans in our, big, significant national poll that we did. And then if you add to that the 17% who are religiously observant, this is a big majority in the Republican Party, so there's nothing fringe about it. The fringe, in fact, is these moderates. And they are the ones who, really are losing because they don't really have a voice in the Republican Party at this moment, especially in those districts that are controlled by conservatives. So they're extreme, but they're definitely not fringe by a long shot, and it's these moderates who are ghettoized within their own party.
That's something, that number really surprises me, because I think I personally still consider that group fringe, and obviously it's not, but I swear it just seems like a couple weeks ago where they were. That's a pretty incredible growth for that faction of the party. Your own conclusion and the comments you quote from focus group members indicate that race is a central issue to Republicans. Yet you say they hardly ever use racial epithets. Are the Republican Party rank and file largely racists?
Well, there is a racial element here, and it comes through in the ways in which they talk about President Obama, the way they talk about immigrants, and there's a real sense that President Obama is foreign, and it's not just that he doesn't share their political views. It's a racialized other that comes out in terms that are sometimes explicit, but mostly not. So, for example, one woman said that President Obama sends all of our country's money to South Africa because he's a Muslim, and South Africa is a Muslim country, right? We did hear, no, that's not right, but that's what
goodness.
She said.
No, I know it's not right.
We heard several comments about President Obama's birth certificate. We talked to folks and asked them to describe their own communities. The evangelical and Tea Party folks were saying that they were small town and that their towns were white, middle class, and Christian, and they really lament that this is changing. But for the most part, these explicitly racial comments were not verbalized. Instead, they come out in subverbal language. And I think that this is a big difference. Stan Greenberg conducted focus groups in the Detroit suburbs in the 1980s, and he, produced his famous analysis of the Reagan Democrats off of that. And then racism was much more explicit in the focus groups. But these folks that we were talking to in the summer of 2013 are very conscious of political correctness. They're so conscious of it that it really weighs on them and it makes them feel marginalized and looked down upon. But it is here. It's just not that it's not coming out in the kind of racial epithets that we would have expected, say, in the 1980s. But instead it's present in the way they talk about the country becoming majority-minority, in the feeling they have of being invaded, and that, is the sort of frame that they use to talk about it. They feel invaded. In the ways in which they talk about social welfare programs, including food stamps, Medicaid, TANF, and now also Obamacare.
Well, it sure underscores that we still have a long way to go in this country when it comes to race relations, in my opinion. Why do so many people believe President Obama is a socialist? I mean, do you suspect any one of them really knows what a socialist is, or for that matter, that Obamacare is largely a Republican plan?
I think a lot of them do not, and I think socialism and socialists, these have become like a catch-all term for Obama's perceived foreignness, and that's one of the ways we see sort of this underlying racism. In a lot of ways, it has become a replacement for the more explicit racialized language that's no longer publicly acceptable. But some of them do have the basics down, especially when among those who are like strong enough Tea Party supporters that they're reading up on very conservative economics. And many of these folks are staunchly anti-government, and they firmly believe in trickle-down economics. So in Roanoke, Virginia, for example, we spoke to a young woman who is, a college student out there, and she told us that Wall Street provides jobs and that rich people should not be punished. And then a man in Roanoke, an evangelical man in his 30s, was even more explicit. He said this: the whole middle-class up economy format is completely ridiculous, because who's going to give the middle class their money? The upper class. The middle class isn't going to make money coming out of nowhere. They've got to get a job. And who gives the jobs? The rich people. So if you've got to take all the rich people's money, that's not going to be able to give anybody a job, so it's just backwards. So some of them are, very conservative and have this, whole separate economics that they're studying up on. But on the other hand, almost every single participant in the Tea Party and evangelical groups at one point accused Obama of being a socialist. And only a handful of them were like that, man in Roanoke were giving us economic lessons a la George Reisman. So we did, speak for the most part to a lot of people who were accusing Obama of being, a socialist who, didn't really have the economics down. We also talked to several people who are currently on social assistance, and they were no less eager to condemn President Obama's perceived socialism. And when it comes to Obamacare, it's just accepted among these conservative factions that is socialized medicine, and that we're turning into Canada.
Turn your televisions off, people. Stop watching Fox News. We're speaking with Erica Seifert, Senior Associate at Greenberg Quinlan Rosner. She specializes in American politics, and she's also a co-author with Stan Greenberg and James Carville, this new study about the Republican Party. Among the three groups of Republicans you studied, which one do you think will emerge as the dominant force? The evangelicals, the Tea Party, or the moderates?
Yeah, well, right now it's clear that the evangelicals are dominant in the Republican Party. Statistically, right, they make up 30%, and then when you add to that the observants, that's 47% of the Republican Party, and so they are dominant right now. But if you add to that evangelicals who support the Tea Party, that's dominant. But there is a striking divide between what they see as the biggest problems in the country. And we ask that, what's the biggest problem in the country right now? And once you get beyond them saying that President Obama and Obamacare are the biggest problems in the country, for evangelicals, it really is this culture rot that they see, and that's, mostly about gay marriage. Whereas the Tea Party folks just don't care, and they are, for the most part, pretty libertarian. And so even though these evangelicals are identifying with the Tea Party, that doesn't hold true to what the non-evangelical Tea Party folks are saying. So that's a pretty striking divide. So even though they have a majority in the Republican Party right now, it's difficult to see that's sustainable. And when you look at the moderates, certainly demographic trends would suggest that moderates, are the future of the Republican Party, and these moderates do lament that the Republican Party might not have a future because they say they can't, sell their kids on the Republican Party. So this battle within the Tea Party itself will be a pretty big struggle, and a much bigger struggle than we've seen in these kinds of movements in the past. Like, this is a bigger struggle than, say, for example, like the labor versus, farmers in the populist movement.
Sure.
This is a struggle that is going to break that sort of faction. It'll be interesting to see which is able to take hold, or if the moderates are able to somehow reform the Republican Party. It just doesn't seem like that's possible, though, where so many moderates are already splitting their tickets.
Yeah, I'm shocked at how that one party, the Republican Party, can be so fractured right now into these three groups. Even with the crossover of Tea Partiers and evangelicals, there's still a lot of differences between them, especially when you talk about social issues.
Yeah, I think it's been easy for that to be a little bit more glossed over, where the Tea Party has been such a resurgent movement. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these folks, evangelicals and Tea Partiers, have been, eager to grab on to something that's different within the Republican Party. And I think that sort of resurgence, once we get, another year or two out, when it's no longer just about the resurgence and instead is about the ideology, these fractures have to come to the surface, and the Tea Party folks already see it. And they say that the Republican Party is driving people away by talking about social issues too much. Mm-hmm.
Now, we should make clear, of course, that focus groups are not scientific samplings and have little, if any, predictive value. However, Erica, do your findings in the year 2013 tell you anything about the election of 2014 or 2016?
Yeah, so the focus groups were actually just the most recent in a series of studies we've been conducting on this. So before these focus groups, we did a lot of quantitative legwork required just to figure out, who these people were, what the factions in the party were, what their basic worldviews and belief systems were, so that we could put them into these, boxes. So we didn't go into the focus group blind. In fact, we selected the locations and screened the participants for attitudes and demographic characteristics based on the extensive survey work we'd done, just to make sure we were getting a pretty fair representation. Now, that does not mean that the focus groups, are quantitatively, legitimate. But what all of this work does tell us, and it is, ongoing. This project isn't over yet, is that we think it'll be pretty difficult for the GOP to emerge as a national party in 2016, or perhaps even, down the line 2018. Republicans will continue to hold on to many of their seats in Congress by virtue of redistricting. These seats, as I said, a majority of the evangelical and Tea Party folks are living in these districts. But with a majority like this pushing the GOP farther to the right on both social issues and economic issues and on immigration, it's very difficult to see how Republicans can nominate a candidate in 2016, for example, who's appealing to a national electorate. It just doesn't seem possible right now. It's even difficult to see how Republicans could maintain a majority in the Senate for very long if they were to win that many seats to gain a majority. I think eventually there will need to be, a reckoning internally in the Republican Party. Unfortunately for the Republicans, these, right-wing groups just don't hold views that are future-oriented. So in the Tea Party, for example, it's not at all like, the DLC of the 1980s. This is not the movement that's going to make the party a national party again. It's just not. And as the moderates in our moderate focus groups told us, they can't sell their kids in the party. They're really looking for the GOP to reform in the way that we heard, Republican pragmatists talking about after the 2012 election. And so a lot of these moderates, as I said before, are splitting their tickets. And the moderate women, we were really surprised. There was, a majority of the folks in the room were strong supporters for a Hillary candidacy in 2016. So it really makes it difficult to say that it's a national party. They could hold a majority in 2014 just because of redistricting and because a majority, in these seats are in these, right-wing factions. But long-term, it doesn't hold, and the GOP is marginalizing itself, as a national party.
Okay. Erica Seifert, Senior Associate at Greenberg Quinlan Rosner, specializing in American politics. She's co-author with Stan Greenberg, James Carville on this study about the Republican Party that we've been discussing today. Erica, thank you so much for joining us, as always, on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back and talking about some more stuff soon.
Thank you for having me. All
right, and this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press and his guest, Jess McIntosh, spokeswoman for Emily's List.
One of the big stories of the week, of course, has been the Hillary Clinton boomlet, matched by maybe the budding Elizabeth Warren boomlet. I see it all in the context of a project called Madam President, launched by Emily's List. Great organization, by the way. There are a lot of powerful political forces in this country. I don't think there's any more powerful than Emily's List. Now 3 million strong, there for the purpose of electing pro-choice women to governor or the United States Senate or the United States Congress. Jess McIntosh is communications director of Emily's List.
Thanks for having me.
Big army here.
Yes, we do. We hit, and what's really exciting about it is that we hit 3. So we ended the 2012 cycle, which was, of course, huge for women candidates, issues, voters. We ended that
some
cycle.
Real victories there.
Yes.
Big victories. Yep.
With 2 million members, and then we added 1 million in the off year. So people ask a lot about whether the enthusiasm among women voters is going to carry through because the 2012 was a presidential. Will they come out in a midterm? I think the fact that an organization whose sole purpose is electing pro-choice Democratic women could see that kind of growth when we don't have marquee races and candidates going on. The Republicans are certainly helping us by shutting down the government over access to women's health care and
what do we now have?
But
20 women in the United States Senate?
Yes, we
right?
do. And you can see the impact of that. I mean, we saw after the shutdown, and the great thing about women legislators is that they're really quite effective. One of the ways that they're effective is that they often pass credit to whoever needs to have that credit in order to get the thing done. Women are very solutions-oriented when they get into Congress. We actually saw those women leaders get credit for helping get us out of the shutdown. We saw the headline saying women were the only adults in Washington. Even John McCain came out and said that credit really deserved to go to his women colleagues on both sides of the aisle. So I think
it was Patty Murray and Susan Collins, Chris, I think, really, right? Who were you were reporting on that at the time.
And now we see Patty Murray in a huge leadership role with the budget talks coming in the next couple of weeks, and we'll probably be seeing a lot more of her very soon.
All right, so let's get right down to it. Who are you supporting, Elizabeth Warren or Hillary Clinton?
This is the best problem on earth to have. No, I think Elizabeth Warren has been quite clear, and I'm a huge fan, and I love seeing all of the press, and the more women are talked about for the White House, the better. She's been quite clear that she's not interested in running, and I think it would be very unlikely that she would, especially before Hillary Clinton makes
But now she's on the cover of New Republic.
And once you're on the cover of New Republic, it's...
And she's very much so on the cover. If anyone saw that, there was about 100 pictures of Elizabeth Warren's face dotting the entire thing. So
it's Malkovich-esque on that cover.
Malkovich, Warren. But she just got done with a grueling Senate campaign. I just cannot see why she'd want to undergo scrutiny. I think she wants to take a breath in the Senate, learn the Senate, and be effective there, and then be a candidate in a while. She's young, she's got a lot of time, and she probably has a lot to do, and a lot she wants to do, and she's not going to be able to do that if she goes back on the campaign trail.
I only have two words in response to that. Barack Obama.
It can happen, but does she have the ambition to go straight to the White House, or does she want to extend her political career longer?
I think she's one of those rare breed that really wants to be in the legislative body to which she was elected. I think she was really excited to become a senator, and we've seen her work on the banking committee kind of showing that agenda that she's thrilled to be making progress on.
So
finally.
Are you saying that because you've already decided to support Hillary Clinton?
Look, we are hopeful that Hillary runs. I think that this idea that people are throwing support behind a candidate that has not announced might be premature. We will certainly be thrilled if she decides to get in. The Emily's List community is obviously behind her 112%. But I think she's making that decision. I'm hopeful it's a yes. And I think if it is a yes, I think the Democratic field is going to be really excited about supporting her. There were a lot of us who were very excited about supporting her in 2008. And I think that since that time, she has only expanded that base of people who want to see her do this. And I do think that the country is in a different place vis-a-vis women's leadership than we were 8 years ago.
We've talked about this before. Do you think that other Democratic women like Amy Klobuchar or Elizabeth Warren or, you name it, ought to just get out of the way because Hillary decides to run?
Right now, I think Hillary is so far ahead of the Democratic field, male and female. I want to make sure that we're being realistic, which is that I don't think that those names you mentioned will get in if Hillary gets in. I also don't want women talked about in a different category than men. We still talk about O'Malley and Cuomo, even though we are talking about Hillary Clinton. So fine, let's talk about Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar and Kirsten Gillibrand too. That doesn't change that I think it is very unlikely that they will challenge her if she decides to get in.
And people are waiting to see what's going to happen.
Yes.
I was in Iowa over the summer talking to a bunch of Democrats there, and they just said, man, it is eerily quiet here in Iowa. Meanwhile, Republicans are crisscrossing the state, guys like Rand Paul, all these guys. But the Democrats are just kind of doing a wait-and-see dance. Of course, Hillary just got out of the administration, or Ms. Clinton just got out of the administration. She doesn't want to be challenging the president or appearing to do so. There's a Democratic president right now, but it is very quiet. Now, I've heard that there is some behind-the-scenes stuff happening that they don't want people to know about necessarily publicly, but no one is giving major big speeches or making a big noise in Des Moines right now.
If it's Hillary, she doesn't need to do that work to make herself known in Des Moines.
She should wait as long as possible,
Yes.
keep everyone from doing all the fundraising that they would need to do, and then she can just jump in. Her operation has been there since, 2006, 2007. She just has to turn on the switch, comes right up, and she's got it.
I hope they've fine-tuned it a little bit since 2008.
Yeah.
There are other important races. Women are leading candidates that we should talk about, too.
You mean ones that aren't 3 years away?
Right, exactly. Thank you.
Got it.
They're the ones that I've been trying to focus on. Let's start with maybe the one best known outside of the group we've talked about is Wendy Davis in Texas.
Oh, sure.
And she's running. She announced running for governor.
Yes.
And what are you doing in Texas, and how's it look?
Well, I mean, obviously, the Emily's List community is thrilled to support Wendy. We've known this has been fun for us because we have known her since her first state Senate race. So now that the country also knows what a rock star she is, we feel pretty great about that. I think that people talk about this one as an uphill climb. It's Texas. The demographics are changing, but we don't know really how quickly, whether it will be in time, all of that. But I think there's the piece of Wendy Davis's history in Texas that we don't talk about in Washington very much because she burst on the scene so recently. She held the only swing district in the Texas states. Texas is so gerrymandered that districts are reliably Republican or Democrat, and that is all there is to it in Texas. She's got the only one that is a swing seat. Independents, moderates, and Republicans have been voting for Wendy Davis since 2008, since she won. And she's been known as a workhorse on education issues. There's a lot more to her than what people saw when she burst onto the national scene. And I think Texas already knows and likes her very much. So I'm really curious to see this one play out.
Have you noticed she doesn't? I mean, she burst on the scene on the abortion issue. That was what she was known for, I think, in the minds of a lot of Americans. Maybe not
non-Texans. Yes, exactly.
So that's what a lot of think. And she doesn't talk about that issue very much. It seems. Is she going to have to talk about that?
I think that Democrats are unfairly say that we don't. We talk about jobs and the economy a lot. That's what voters want to be talking about. Emily's List does tons of polling of various segments of the electorate. And the issues that they want prioritized are workplace issues, are economic issues, are pocketbook issues. So to the extent that access to reproductive health care and birth control is an economic issue, we talk about that. But I think it's this Republican obsession with the social issues, with abortion, with contraceptives, that really is alienating voters, because not only are they wrong on that issue, they're prioritizing the wrong issue altogether. So I think she's absolutely right to focus on the issues that the people she's asking for their votes want to see their leaders focus on.
We haven't had a Democratic governor of Texas since another great woman governor,
yes.
The great Ann Richards. Do we know the Republican nominee for governor?
Yeah, Greg Abbott, who's the Attorney General.
Okay.
I'm not actually entirely sure if that field is set, but everybody talks about him as the front runner. There might be another one jumping in.
The other race that's getting a lot of attention quickly before we break here is Kentucky, up against Mitch McConnell,
Yes.
Allison Lundergan Grimes.
Yes.
We got to do something about it. Why does she have to use that middle name? Allison Grimes, isn't that
That's
good enough?
That's a good politician name, yeah. But I think it's an old Kentucky name. I think is why she keeps the Lundergan.
All right.
It
It's
is.
her choice, not mine. Last poll I saw, she was actually either tied or up ahead, I think, of Mitch McConnell a little bit.
And I'm skeptical of ones that suggest that it's that close right now. But she is the best candidate. She's 34 years old. She's a very popular Secretary of State. She offers the clearest contrast with Mitch McConnell, who just, I mean, she's Kentucky and he's Washington. She's young and he's old. She's new and he's everything that's wrong with Congress is literally embodied by Mitch McConnell. I mean, Republicans in Kentucky do not want to vote to reelect Mitch McConnell. I'm not sure that they'll switch and vote for the Democrat, but there is such dissatisfaction with the job that he's doing, and she's dynamic and she's making the case, and I want to see her go for another year.
I met a woman at a gathering I was at the other day, a woman from Kentucky, a Republican from Kentucky, who just said that, right? She said, I voted for Mitch McConnell like all my life. I mean, can I vote for somebody new this year? I mean, it was her feeling about it.
Well, we know from the numbers, from the
I mean,
money spent, that McConnell is nervous. He's looking at Bevin on the right, and he's looking at Allison Lundergan Grimes on the left. And so he knows he's kind of in the hot seat here. The one asset he really has, though, is the same thing Harry Reid had back in 2010, and that's he's the top guy in the Senate, the top Republican. And he can say, look, if you put in someone new who's 34 years old, who has no experience, they're not going to bring home the goods. And that's what actually he's telling everyone. Especially, I did a story at Yahoo News the other day about tobacco industry. That the Kentucky tobacco is threatened by a new European Union rules right now, and McConnell's telling him, look, I can save tobacco in Kentucky and ALG can't. And so that's his big argument. Whether it works, we'll see.
I think
ALG meaning
Alison Lundergan
the
Grimes.
reporter's nickname for Alison Lundergan
What rhymes
Grimes.
with Alison Lundergan Grimes?
What rhymes with hug me? I don't know. It's a mystery.
All right. We've got a great team here in studio with us. Chris Moody from Yahoo News, Jess McIntosh from Emily's List. I want to come back to issues where it's an interesting phenomenon on the Hill right now on the important issue of sexual assaults in the military, which is a real scandal, the numbers. We have women on two different sides of that issue, but both Democrats.
We do.
Kirsten Gillibrand and Claire McCaskill
and to be fair,
taking a different approach to it.
Yes. They're not on different sides of that issue, as Chris pointed out in the break.
Right. No, there's only one side of this issue.
They're on different sides of how to fix it. And I think that is, I'm watching very closely. I believe and I trust both women to be good actors on this, obviously, and I want to see this debate happen. But I think the story that matters the most to our community and possibly to the country is we were talking about the impact of having 20 women senators. Well, 20 years ago, you had the tailhook scandal. All this military sex assault came to light. It was a real horrific revelation, and exactly nothing happened. I mean, nothing changed. Possibly reporting got better, but nothing was done to curb this. This year, we have 20 women in the Senate. And we are going to, regardless of whose solution winds up being adopted, we are going to have the most sweeping reforms in history to stop this. It is so important that we have varying perspectives represented at the leadership table. And when we have women who have been there long enough to have attained some seniority, who are able to actually put their ideas forward, it's an incredible thing to see the difference in this debate now and before.
Kirsten Gillibrand, Senator, wants to take it out of the military chain of command.
Yes.
Claire McCaskill wants to reform it and end it, but leave it in the military chain of command. They are both, you work with them, Chris, and see them, they're both forces of nature, man. I wouldn't know who to bet on that contest,
I mean,
right?
It's a battle for a good end, no matter which route you're taking, of course. So it's a good fight that needs to be debated, and it's something that needs to be talked about. And maybe even the appearance of conflict will give people more reason to cover it and put the issue higher up. I mean, it's just something that I think should be talked about a lot more. They have the hearings, and it goes up in the media for a couple days. But a debate about a solution will be good. I think a good thing.
And it's been neat to see it break down not along partisan lines, not along male-female lines. We've got Murkowski on the side of Gillibrand. It's been just a fascinating debate to watch. It's nice to see one in Washington where everybody seems to legitimately want to find a solution and work together to do it.
And the end
good
result,
faith debate.
Yes,
believe it or not,
the end result is going to be a good thing here and a good movement forward. You both have important work to do. We'll let you get to it. Thank you so much, Chris, for being here the whole hour.
Thank
Great
you.
fun. Come back anytime. Jess McIntosh, love you and love having you in the show.
Thank you
you
so much.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Geoffrey Kabaservice, Erica Seifert, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today.